our next session, we have a panel who are going to share with you some of what they've been doing to raise critical community issues through the lens of data and technology. The panel will be led by our Director of Developer Experience, Chris Metcalf. So please welcome to the stage Chris Metcalf and our panel.
Oh, thank you. All right. Hi, everybody. It's a good crowd out here. So I'm Chris Metcalf. I'm Socrata's Director of Developer Experience. And I have here a panel of some great people who are very experienced in working with government as civic hackers and running hackathons and things like that. We've got Derek Eder from DataMade and the Chicago Hack Nights. We've got Jack Maddens from Code for America. And then we've got Carey Anne Nadeau from Open Data Nation.
Yes.
And we're here to talk a little bit about how you can engage better with your developer community and how you can create a relationship with them where it's a two-way street, not just a one-way street. So first we're going to start out with some slides. And Derek's going to go first.
Ooh, I got a clicker. All right.
Clicker.
Next one. OK, great. Hi, everyone. So this is actually my second Socrata Customer Summit. I think I'm 2 for 2 so far, so this is great to be here. Last year, how many of you went last year and heard, did you hear my talk about sort of the same kind of thing? OK, I'm going to try to not like rehash a lot of the same things I said. Instead, I'm going to talk about a particular story. But before I get to that, I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am. So as Chris mentioned, I'm a co-founder and partner at a company called DataMade. We're a civic technology company in Chicago. We've been around for about 3.5 years. We build civic technology projects for government, for academia, for journalists, and also research and advocacy organizations throughout Chicago, but also nationally and internationally as well. I'm also the organizer of the Chai Hack Night. It is the country's longest running recurring hack night. We've been meeting every Tuesday for almost 4 years now, and we've had 179 events. We've grown from about 4 people at the very first one back in 2012, and now we're averaging about like 90 people. So it's become kind of this epicenter for a lot of the civic innovation in Chicago. So I'm going to talk to you guys about a fun story. This happened this year. Anyone here familiar with campaign finance disclosure and like, oh yeah, fun stuff, right? So in Illinois, we have this website that's run by the Illinois State Board of Elections. And it is a website that's built around 1995, I think. And it's got a ton of amazing information. It's got things like every committee that's ever been registered, political committee that's ever been registered in the state of Illinois. So this is stuff in Chicago, but stuff in like the most rural, tiny towns. And any candidate that is associated with these committees are also on in this sort of website that you can access by going to that previous page and typing in a search and then seeing information like this. This is the search box. This is like how you would get data out of this particular system. I would like to describe it as just like a little bit obtuse. It's a little hard to use in that you need to know what you're looking for before you can look for it. Maybe you could describe it as a bit Kafka-esque. And so this is what this is what people are confronted with when they want to find this information. And so as being open data evangelists and open data experts, we're like, well, we want to liberate this data. We would love to have access to this data. But they don't make it available for just bulk download. You have to only get it through this website. We tried to have some conversations early on with them about releasing it, and there's just not really much of an interest to it. So we decided to do what a lot of people in the civic tech world that are on the outside of government do. We scrape. Has everyone ever heard of that term before, scraping? It's not this. It is basically writing code that looks kind of like this sometimes, that goes and pretends to be a person and clicks on every button on every link on every page and saves that page and then tries to parse it and turn it into something that's actually usable.
Scraping paint.
It is kind of like scraping paint. Yeah, it's as painful and annoying as scraping paint off a house. But sometimes it's the only way to get data. So we started scraping this website. And that went around for a while. And we ended up saying, hey, this is a great thing to make available. We have it. We're scraping every day. And we decided to make this data available for anybody to download. And we made this website called electionmoney.org. And it does exactly what it says right there on that screen. If you're interested in this data, you can download 20 years of campaign finance data down to like the individual donation. There's over like 3 or 4 million of them. So very rich data, very awesome, right? So that was going on for a while, and that was great, and journalists and reporters were using this thing. It was a great resource. And then, unfortunately, this happened. One day it stopped updating, and we realized very quickly that they were blocking us, that the Illinois State Board of Elections had found the place that we were running the scraper, and they basically said, don't let them access this website anymore. Incidentally, we also personally couldn't access the website because it was running from a similar IP address that we had, so I actually couldn't go to the website anymore. Funny when that happens. So we're like, well, this sucks. We want this data. So we decided to get on the phone with people, and this is where the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform comes in. They're a group based in Chicago, and they're all about furthering transparency around campaign finance, and they've been around for about 20 years in Chicago. We knew them a little bit. We actually got some help from them on that election money website, and we decided to have call them up and say, what should we do? Maybe we can have a conversation with the State Board of Elections. So we all decided to get on a phone call together with them and ask them if they could first maybe stop blocking our scraper. We got a response sort of like, well, your scraper is we are treating your scraper as an attack on our website. We would call it a denial of service attack, causing a catastrophic number of errors. We are not going to unblock the scraper. And so at that point, I was like, well, I would love to just not have to scrape at all. Could you then make this data available in some sort of bulk format? And after a lot of roundabout, figuring out what it would actually take for them to do that, they agreed to do that. And that actually ended up with a release of this data. All the committees, candidates, and officers, every individual donation and expenditure, like I said, around 4 million of those, 20 years of data, updated every day. So this is an unprecedented release of data. The only catch to it was they only wanted to give it to us in a FTP password secured folder. And at that point, I was like, well, I'll take it. This is totally a victory. I would wish if you would just release it publicly, but they weren't comfortable with that, so we took that data. And then we decided to actually do something even more engaging with this data than just let people download it. We teamed up with ICPR, that organization I mentioned, the Campaign for Political Reform, and we built Illinois Sunshine with it. Powered by that data that was released, you can see a lot of the same information and then some that you can't see on the State Board of Elections website. You can look up, you can do a pretty powerful searching and find all the candidates and committees. You can see these cool bar charts about how much money they have. This is Ed Burke's committee. He's been an alderman for 45 years, and he has a treasure trove of money, which you can see in that chart. And the best thing about it is we asked the State Board of Elections, well, you won't make it available. Can we make it available? It's just a copy of yours. And they actually said yes. So you can go download all this data right now on this website and get the data. So it's not exactly an ideal, in no part in this story is a data portal involved. I really, really wish there was. I wish the state of Illinois actually were a little bit more proactive about trying to put this sort of stuff on the data portal, but sometimes you have to settle for this, which I still think is pretty good. So that's a little story about just trying to get data out. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talking more about it and answering any questions. Thanks.
These are very deep. Yeah. You kind of sink into them, and it takes a lot of effort to get out of them. So next, I'm going to talk about, originally we were supposed to have Michael Mattmiller, the CTO of the city of Seattle, here on the panel as well to talk about Hack the Commute, which is a hackathon that we helped with in Seattle. He had to go back to Seattle kind of for an emergency to defend his IT budgets to the city council. So he's not going to be able to do it. So I'm going to be your Michael Mattmiller impersonation today and talk a little bit about Seattle Hack the Commute. So in Seattle, we're kind of going through a second gold rush. Seattle was founded on the Alaskan gold rush, and now we're going through this tech rush where, much like San Francisco, there's huge job growth, especially in South Lake Union around Amazon, tons of construction, a lot of people commuting into the city. Seattle traditionally has really bad traffic. Now we have even worse traffic. The city has to scale all of its services to meet those needs. The taxes aren't growing fast enough to build the actual infrastructure that we need, and these things are all distributed across multiple systems. And they're trying to figure out, in the face of all this construction and all this traffic and all this growth in Seattle, how we basically keep from becoming San Francisco. We want to avoid the San Francisco problem. And one of the biggest problems was commuting and getting people to ride public transit and getting people to engage with these other transit options other than just driving. So what can the government do? So what Seattle did with Hack the Commute is they actually did what I think is probably one of the best examples of a hackathon that really engaged with the developer community that I've seen in a long time. They had, what you see here is, the picture is from a kickoff event that they did about 2 or 3 months before the event. They engaged with Code for Seattle, known as Open Seattle, started talking about what data they needed, had them kind of co-organize the hackathon, so it was a shared effort between the city and the developer community. The developer community not only helped identify the data sets, but also load the data sets. They engaged with local universities and hackerspaces and advocacy groups, and then also government agencies. And the result was Hack the Commute, which was this amazing hackathon. They had something like 150, 200 different data sets, about 150 participants. And also, one of the things that I thought was really inspiring and awesome about it is they also had about 20 or 25 government employees who came not only for the kickoff on Friday night, but actually stuck around for the whole weekend. And they were running office hours about data, they were embedding with teams, they were providing project ideas, and that interaction between the government and the people at the hackathon led to some great results like that Access Map project that you saw yesterday up on this same stage. And I just wanted to highlight Hack the Commute as an example of a really awesome collaboration between the developer community and a government. And I'm going to kind of represent Michael in the Q&A and kind of answer some questions about that as well. So going on next to Jack. You can get out of your chair.
Oh my God, it's kind of tough. You're right. Good afternoon, guys. I'm from Code for America. How many of you guys know about Code for America? Oh my God, I don't think there's a room where a high percentage of people would know about Code for America. Awesome. So I won't belabor you guys too much with the point. I think that the perspective I'm going to give you guys or attempt to give you guys in this presentation is as someone who about 3.5 years ago helped co-found the Code for America Brigade, which is Code for America's volunteer force. And my hope, and then after that, helped start our peer network for government officials. And so I've seen both sides of the psychology, and I'm going to attempt to create a bridge in the next 4.5 minutes that you guys can walk over to open data and civic tech success. I'm trying to control expectations here. So Code for America is an organization dedicated to making government more user-centered, data-driven, and iterative. And that is really kind of based on our belief that government can work for the people, by the people, in the 21st century. But one of the significant barriers to that is that in the 21st century, government is inextricably linked to the digital. And that has created a gap from some legacy process, legacy technology, and requires a reorienting of the way that we think about service to residents who now have surpassing expectations of the services that we get them. And so at this conference and all along your open data journey, I'm sure that you've been called, you guys are the open data pioneers, the civic tech champions that are going to bring this new reality. And you're kind of saying me, and you're saying yes you, and you're saying yes me. And then all of a sudden, you might find yourself at a place that looks a little bit like this, which is, this is my hometown brigade in Oakland, called Open Oakland. And so you're sitting here, you've worked probably all day, probably from early in the morning. It's like 6:37. You just ate like 2 slices of cold pizza, and like had a beer, and you're like, what the hell am I doing here? And it's your job to try and make a bridge into this group and help and get them to help you span the gap in where the technological capability of your city might be. And I'm here to tell you that you can do it. And the inspiration I'm going to draw on here is a fantastic Medium post from a woman named Lauren Ancona, who is a civic hacker in the city of Philadelphia. And she wrote a post called "Stop Waiting for Permission" about her journey in civic hacking, which is that 2011 Code for America, our first fellowship, one of our first fellowships was in Philadelphia, and she went to a hackathon. And was, she learned about it at an Ignite, actually, from one of our fellows. And they invited her to come to a hackathon. And she had never really, she's a marketer, had never really been particularly engaged in the civic process, but she really cared a lot about the schools and education in Philadelphia. And at her first hackathon, she created a map visualizing the school budget. And she was hooked. And she said, it gave me a sense that I could do something with my skills, the limited HTML and CSS that she knew as a marketer. She paired with someone who knew D3 to create this visualization, and she felt like she was hooked. And then she encountered a problem that she often had, and a lot of her friends had, which is that she didn't understand where could you park in Philadelphia. And so at another hackathon over another weekend, she took a stab at some JavaScript and created a parking map. And now what's interesting about this map is it looks relatively simple, is that by Monday, it had gotten 17,000 views, and the parking authority was calling her. And all of a sudden, Lauren Ancona was giving the Philadelphia Parking Authority tips about how they could make their data more accessible. And that's when she started thinking, wow, there is a huge role that I can play here. And she felt incredibly fulfilled with what she could be doing for her city. And when she found out that the office of the Open Data Office had a new position opening up, she thought, could I really go work for that? And she came to the Code for America Summit. She was talking to a woman named Susan Crawford. She said, God, could I really work in government? And she said, yes, you can. You just have to stay joyful and optimistic. And now, today, she is working on a project called alpha.phila.gov with the Philadelphia web team. And she loves her job. And so this is a little bit of the psychology you can see there if you trace back to it. Like, what are the moments of inspiration? And who else was there that was able to pull Lauren Ancona in? Luckily, she had Mark Head, who is the CDO of Philadelphia, and was played a fantastic anchor role for them in creating space and getting them the data and answering questions about the data. And that's a lot of what it takes. And so, lucky for you guys is that the brigade has grown into a very, very, very big force. There are over 35,000 people who are signed up on our meetup page. There are 126 brigades that meet regularly. And so that's the challenge to you guys, is how do we build a bridge to them? And they're working on some fantastic stuff. So a little bit of a fireworks show here in rapid fire is, this is a day in the life of an NYC taxi. And basically every time you open it, it takes a unique view of a taxi going through New York City. It's kind of fun. MBTA Ninja crowdsources the delays from real T riders in real time. So you can, you don't have to wait for the transit authority to tell you it's delayed. You actually get updates from your fellow riders. This is Oakland did a budget visualization, and this is a visualization that shows what are the neighborhoods that are most at risk for not having smoke alarms. This is a park equity map that shows what are the neighborhoods that are least likely to have access to a park. And finally, this is a project that we actually run out of Code for America called the US Open Data Census, which has brigades and volunteers help cities judge the accessibility of their data and puts them on a list, so then you guys can get to the top of the list and tell your boss, we're at the top of this nationwide list, which sometimes helps. And so each of these stories, there is a Lauren and there is a Mark in each of them. And in each of them, there were connections that were made, there were questions that were answered, there was patience that was given for these folks. And so the one final story I'll tell about a really cool project that involved a lot of cooperation. This is my city's website, www.oaklandnet.com. It's kind of embarrassing. It could use a little work. And in what we, as a volunteer project with the Oakland Brigade, they made a project called Oakland Answers, which is they had residents and city staff get together to answer the most common questions that people typically go to the website for, like, how do I report an abandoned vehicle? And instead of having a 6-page PDF document to download, they have 3 easy steps that you use. A collaboration between resident and government subject matter expert to simplify the process. A fantastic day. And so there's about 30 quick answers and actually a few of the web services that we pull into this site now. And that was just a volunteer project, and it has led us to a org-wide initiative that we had at Code for America called the Digital Front Door Initiative, which is basically trying to draw attention to the fact that your city website is your digital front door. Not only for the technorati who do not want to come to City Hall or navigate through a Byzantine process, but also for folks who do not have the time to get to City Hall, who can access city services. And so, in closing, I say, how to engage, be available and interested. 2, civic hackers are the early adopters of your open data. Mark Leach is one of my open data heroes in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he does not open up a data, he does not agree to open up a data set until there's a viable consumer of that data, which is a very interesting way to ensure that the data quality is there, because you have someone on the receiving end of it who's saying, this is great or this is crap. Accessing your no is very important, which is to say, if someone has a really crazy idea, don't just have to wave people on. Access your no and know that you can say, hey, maybe let me reframe this a little bit. Let me get in touch with you. And being an anchor, for instance, in Open Oakland, our anchor was Nicole Nedich, who found us a way. We didn't have a venue to stay at. And so she was like, hey, do you want to meet in City Hall every Tuesday? And so now all of a sudden, there's about 30 civic hackers that meet in City Hall every week. And whenever their friends ask them where they're going, they say, I'm going to City Hall, which I think is pretty powerful. And finally, the last one that I'll add on here is connect the nerds to the nerds. When Lauren Ancona was able to talk directly to the parking authority, I've seen this happen a billion times. When civic hackers talk to the subject matter experts in government who deal with those business processes every day, you get the collision of nerd on nerd. And it is fantastic, and it's like a supernova. And so whenever you can do that, make that possible. Thank you guys so much.
Do you have a slide for me?
Oh, yeah, if you click the slide, then she should her intro slide.
Hi, so I'll start by asking the same question. How many of you have heard of Open Data Nation? We've only been around for about a year, so I'll give you a pass this year. Next year, I'll ask the same question. Hopefully, you'll have heard or remember this presentation. I'll mention our name is, we did change it from Open Data Discourse. I started a company in 2014 at MIT in academia, and discourse is a much more pleasant word in that environment. Everyone was like, yeah, discourse, great word for your company. In the real world, people were like, what do you do? I don't understand. So we changed it to Open Data Nation. We have a really simple mission. Let's put open data to good use. Everybody in this room has published data. Now what? What are you going to do with it? How are you going to put it to good use? We've got treasure troves of data. I did a calculation about a week ago that there's 119% growth or something like this, crazy numbers of growth of data sets online in the last 5 years, proliferating the number. But the number of applications of that data to engage residents, to make better decisions, for our cities to run more efficiently or effectively, are few and far between. The open data movement is transitioning from a stage where we just publish data for the sake of publishing it to a place where the leaders in this sector are thinking, how can I use this to do my job better, to make my city better? So that's where Open Data Nation comes in. We're a consulting company, we're a social benefit company, so we have a double bottom line. Every year we're legally responsible for talking about how we have social impact. And what we do, we offer 3 things: courses, trainings, and analytics. We pick these things in direct response to what we heard from you all, kind of innovators in government, and those responsible for publishing open data. So to give you an example of one project that we've done in each one of those streams. So along the courses stream, we're teaching new populations, new voices, engaging people in courses that teach data analytics and host events to invite those people to interact with you, those who publish data. So as an example, we've worked with the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts last year. They were launching their open data portal for the first time. They were really afraid that they would publish data on a website that no one would ever look at. Not only was it like publishing a book in a library to collect dust, people weren't even aware that the library existed, because it didn't exist 3 months earlier. So they had this great public resource, they invested a whole ton of money in it, but they needed people to come to the website. So we worked with them to host a hackathon, an online hackathon. We thought, what's some accessible data that we can use to draw interest to a broader selection of data on their open data portal? So we picked traffic crashes, and in consultation with Cambridge over a 3 or 4 month period, we helped them organize this entirely digital online hackathon. And the responses we got were varied and very interesting. We got a project from Ethan. He's a high school student. He did a project looking at traffic crashes around his high school. And he realized that all of the traffic crashes were happening where the big yellow bus parks in the bike lane. Every city planner in the room had this light bulb moment where they were like, I hadn't thought about that. Shoot, like I'm responsible for planning the bike lanes and I hadn't thought about where the buses would park around schools. His insight, his expertise as a high school student helped the city make a better decision about how to keep everybody safe, and in particular, students going to public high schools. So we also offer trainings. We've heard from open data providers or cities that publish open data that one of their big issues is getting their employees to publish data responsibly, understand the value of that data, and prioritize specific data sets for publication. So we work with cities to identify opportunities to train their own employees to be better data stewards. We had an event with the Inter-American Development Bank. They have an open data portal, contains information on all of their investments around Central and South America, from water to natural disaster to public health. They realized that a project that happened in Uruguay was the same project that happened in Peru, looking at water sanitation. The people in Uruguay never learned or never heard from the people doing the same exact project in Peru. They had this problem of siloing information across departments within their organization, something we all kind of in the public sector struggle with. So we hosted this really kind of fun event called speed dataing. We sat people down across from one another for really short conversations and made introductions across silos that had never had the opportunity to talk over the subject matter of data. From that experience, they've got a whole new data portal design. They have new collaborations that will be happening over the coming year, and they're looking to really raise up some of the data stories of the new collaborations that occurred. And last but not least, we do analytics. We found that organizations, like we've seen some really cool stuff presented today by Code for America and DataMade and Socrata. How do I get that to my city? Like, how do I get that application, that taxi cab application or food inspection violation algorithm or whatever it may be that you keep seeing happen in cities around the world, but you want for your own city? Well, what we've seen is that maybe you don't have knowledge of really good projects out there. Maybe you have data, but you don't know how to use it yet. Or maybe you don't have a data scientist on staff. Like, some of these projects take a background in data science and statistics to implement. So again, Open Data Nation has worked with clients like Montgomery County, Maryland. We're taking their food inspection violation data, building an algorithm that predicts more violations and sooner, hopefully, fingers crossed. This isn't a unique project. It's happened already in Chicago and in San Francisco. But there's 450 cities in the US that publish data on Socrata's platform around food inspections. And I can only name 3 that have incorporated them into an algorithm that predicts violations and helps prioritize inspectors' time to identify really unsafe and unsanitary conditions in restaurants. So we're helping cities transition from the cool stuff that you see on stage and happening in the city of the neighbor sitting next to you, and bring it to your city, providing the consultation and the strategy that you need to develop communications plans, to develop algorithms, to develop engagement strategies, to host hackathons. Again, my company is called Open Data Nation. I'm really looking forward to your questions about how we actually do some of this stuff. We'd love to chat after as well. Thank you.
All right, now we're going to get into the question and answer portion. We've got about 11 minutes left, so I'm going to do about, I think, 5 or 6 minutes of canned questions, and then we're going to throw them out to the audience. If nobody has questions in the audience, I'm going to point at random people, and you're going to have to ask a question no matter what. So you don't get out of this one for free.
Everyone just like leave.
Unless you just
He's going to run away now. No, you can't leave. Don't leave.
She's locked the door.
All right, so let's start with, I'll start with Derek. I'll ask you the first question because
Sure,
you're on the left. If you're a government and you've never engaged with your developer community, what's the highest, like what's the thing that you can do that has the most impact as a first step?
There's 2 things I would say. The first is release open data. That's the reason that I am here right now. I'm a developer. I've been doing that in Chicago for 10 years now. But before I started doing this, I kind of knew what open government was. There was a group in Chicago that was doing it called OpenGov Chicago, and they were advocating for it, but they were kind of just sort of, that's all they could do, right? Because there wasn't a lot of data. And then we got a new mayor, and that mayor decided to have an open data policy for the first time, and they released data. And that is when I showed up. That's when I was like, oh, I can do something with this. I can make something interesting with this. So release data and make sure that it's real data that's interesting. I mean, we've seen a lot of cities out there release a ton of data already. It's pretty clear what some of the really powerful and highly asked for data sets are on. I think Mark Head likes to use buses, so transit data, bullets, so crime data, and budgets, so budgetary information. So those are 3 good places to start. The other one is, my second piece of advice would be, there is very likely to be groups that are at least sort of interested in this stuff already meeting in your city. Go to them, like literally physically go there and meet them. That is like an amazing first place to start, just because you'll realize just what you already have, and you might be surprised.
Very cool. All right, I'll direct the next one to Jack, since he is in the middle. I'm going to tweak your question a little bit here. If you're government, you see the awesome stuff that like a brigade builds, or you have a problem you want to solve. What are some of the best ways those governments can communicate those needs to their developer community?
Well, going is a great one. Again, I would just add to Derek's thing is everyone in that room is going to feel really cool if they have a person, if an official from the city is there. Like, you will be treated a little bit like a celebrity, not a lot, but a little bit, and you'll. And so that is one of the most fantastic ways, and they'll probably even ask you to speak. And so going prepared with things that I would identify as needs is great. Another way is to let people across your city know that you are going to that venue and ask them what they would want, because they might not want to go to a hack night, but they're happy that you are, and they'll give you stuff that is a pain in the ass for them to deal with on a regular basis. And it's those pains in butts that honestly make some of the best civic tech projects.
So let's go down that thread. That's an interesting thread to talk about. What kinds of people should be sent to events like this? What kind of personas? What government employees? So
the reason why I said, and I'm kind of regretting saying nerd on nerd now, was we organized.
That is a hashtag.
Yeah, I know. We organized the first city camp in Oakland, and one of the most amazing moments was when there was a developer talking to the head of the city's recycling project. And this guy was, so intensely and deeply talking about the study that they had done to see who recycles on every block. And I could just see this developer's eyes lighting up with that level of information. Oftentimes, I'm a generalist. Oftentimes, it's generalists in these positions that are managing these products. So what I'd say is, if you can go every time, and then you can bring along someone new every time, that is such a winning way to access a new level of subject matter expertise, while also remaining the continuity in the acre with a brigade or a group.
Yeah, and if I could pile on to the nerds thread, I would say that especially in the beginning, it's good to bring technical people. The Tom Schenk, who's the chief data officer for the city of Chicago, is a regular at our hack night. He showed up before he was even a city employee. We kind of like to say that he was ours before he worked for the city. So that's pretty important in the beginning. There's a lot, and I would say that it's important because it depends on what you want to accomplish, right? If it's about talking about the data that's available, and oftentimes that's what Tom does when he shows up. And John Levy, who's here at the conference, who works with Tom, they show up and to act as sort of that liaison person to say if someone has questions about a data set, or if they have data that they're announcing, they announce it at the hack night. And they're there to answer questions because data never speaks for itself. And they can also relay you to the right people inside government, right? The folks who can't make it there. I would also say that now, that we've gotten a little bit further down the road, again, we've been doing this for almost 4 years now, we want more than just developers. Developers are great, but they're one slice of it. We need the policy people. We need the people who understand the broad implications of it. Developers oftentimes have really cool and innovative ideas. Also, they sometimes have really bad ideas. And so it's important to have a mix of inputs from folks in city and outside government to just come up with ideas together, right? Because it really, broadening that just makes it much more possible for really awesome things to get built.
Carey Anne, looks like you want to jump in.
Oh, I do, absolutely. This hits a heartstring for me. In our experience organizing a hackathon, not saying that a hackathon is necessarily the solution to the problem, but in our experience in organizing a hackathon, being proactive about reaching out to communities that don't typically attend necessarily a Code for America Brigade event. We had in the hackathon about traffic crashes a strong senior citizen community. I didn't realize that seniors are very likely to be hit by vehicles. As a population, they're more likely than any other age group to be hit by a car. I don't know why, maybe they're shorter and less visible, unclear.
That's why you help old ladies cross.
That's why you should. You should be a good citizen. We also had a high school student I just mentioned. We are actively, as an organization, looking to open a physical location in Ward 7 and 8 here in the District of Columbia, because civic technologists are great, but they're a very, very small slice of society and a very small perspective, a very narrow window of a perspective. They don't necessarily have intimate connections to the experience of going to a food pantry or applying for food stamps. They may be able to build you a mobile application to clarify that process or explain to a public-facing, public audience how they can go about making better decisions. But you still need to engage the people for whom that directly implicates their actual lives. Do the user research to understand their experience before you look to slap on a solution. So a hackathon is one way to go about recruiting those people to come to you, but being kind of a public presence and suggesting and convening people around issue areas. The seniors will seek you out. The high school students will seek you out if you put your face out there as somebody who's interested in starting a conversation.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I will just add on one little thing to that. So people with the problems, that's critical to have in an event. But then also people with the data who have the permission to release data. There's nothing as cool as being at an event where someone needs a data set that isn't out yet, and you've got the data owner at the event, and they can be like, oh, I have that data, and then they release it. Like the effect that has on that group is really, really inspiring.
It's like an album dropping.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the sneak peek. There's one thing I wanted to add to this in the role of anchor and bringing your subject matter experts to these venues is also playing air traffic controller and encouraging that subject matter expert to bring in their own external stakeholders, and so they can be the people that bring in people who have those problems. And ideally, it's not just people who have the problems; it's the helpers, because the helpers are often the furthest extended folks who can really, with better technology, be a force multiplier.
Very cool. We're getting a little short on time. We got about 2 minutes, so we'll take a couple questions. Anybody have a question from the audience? I'm going to point at people. Okay, Steve Ellsworth, you have to ask a question now. I told you I was going to put somebody on the spot. You've done a lot of hackathons with me, Steve.
Someone save Steve.
We have some actual hands being raised now.
Wow, that's what it takes.
It doesn't help to have a plant if they don't know they're the plant.
We have a real.
Right in the back there.
Yeah, on the example from the Chicago board, or the Illinois board.
Yeah.
Had you approached them initially before you started scraping it?
Yeah.
Hey, can we get this? And was it it sounds like from the case study, it was sort of like, we'll do this first, and then kind of put pressure on you to release it.
Yeah, we did have some conversations. They honestly didn't go very well or very far. And I gave that example because that is the same pattern I see. I've experienced that pattern many, many times. I've seen other folks experience that pattern. If you've ever heard of the website EveryBlock, that's how they were founded, scraping websites. So I gave that example because it's so common, and it's a classic example of basically asking for forgiveness, not permission, right? You kind of just have to go out and do it sometimes and get the data, demonstrate what could be done with it and why it should be released to get released, right? So it's happens a lot, not just in Chicago.
It's really a chicken and egg problem with open data, where if you don't have a solution, if there's not a reason perceived for needing the data, it's tough to get the data out.
Yeah.
Sometimes being the chicken or the egg, whichever one comes first, is better.
Yeah.
The government getting the data out.
And it's also kind of the other side of Carey Anne's point about what do I do with this data now that I've released it. There's also data out there that people are desperate for, so desperate that will take this really, really hard, they make all this really massive effort to get data. And so that's oftentimes a place to look, right? Look at your FOIA logs and see who keeps asking for the same data over and over again, or what data keeps getting asked, and who's scraping it, right? And sometimes that's the data that's maybe not the easiest to release politically, or it might be stuff that's a little bit sensitive. I mean, campaign finance stuff in Chicago, some people probably would rather you didn't poke around with that, right? But oftentimes that's what people want. And as some of the reporters from the Chicago Tribune say, transparency is not supposed to be easy. It's not transparency unless it's like a little painful.
Very cool. Well, I see Marcus looking at me right now. I think we need to go. I want to thank everybody for their attendance and attention, and thank my awesome panel for their help. For Jack and Carey Anne, this is actually their second panel of the day. They're on like a panel tour of DC.
Together,
yeah. They were on the same panel this morning.
Yeah, right. I mean, come on.
Keep it going.
Right?
Yeah. Let's go to the next panel.
Thanks, everyone.